She was kidnapped by the man she trusted most, her own psychology professor, but before she died, she left behind a diary, and it exposed everything. October 15, 2019, a cold Tuesday morning in the quiet suburb of Millbrook Heights, just outside of Portland, Oregon. The kind of neighborhood where kids still ride their bikes without helmets and neighbors actually know each other's names, where the biggest crime is usually someone forgetting to curb their dog. But on this particular morning, all of that changed forever, when Mrs. Eleanor Vance made a discovery that would send shockwaves through this tight-knit community and leave even seasoned homicide detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about human nature. Eleanor was out for her usual morning walk with her golden retriever, Max, when the dog suddenly broke free from his leash and bolted toward the old Blackwood property at the end of Maple Street. The house had been empty for months after old Mr. Blackwood passed away, and his family was still fighting over the estate. As Eleanor chased after Max, calling his name, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The basement window that had always been boarded up was now broken, with glass scattered on the ground below, and there, partially visible through the jagged opening, was what looked like a human hand. Within minutes, the street was swarming with police cars, ambulances, and crime scene investigators. What they found inside that basement would haunt them for years to come. The body of 23-year-old Rebecca Martinez, a local college student who had been missing for 3 weeks. But this wasn't just any murder scene. This was something far more sinister, far more planned, and far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Rebecca had been reported missing on September 24th by her roommate Sarah Chen, when she failed to return home from her evening jog. Rebecca was a creature of habit. She ran the same route every single day at exactly 6 p.m., rain or shine. She was studying psychology at Portland State University, working part-time at a local bookstore, and by all accounts, she was a bright, ambitious young woman, with her whole life ahead of her. She had no enemies, no dangerous ex-boyfriends, no involvement in drugs or anything that would put her at risk. She was, as her friends and family described her, invisible in the best possible way. The kind of person who minded her own business and never caused trouble for anyone. The initial investigation had turned up very little. Rebecca's jogging route took her through several residential neighborhoods and past a small park, but despite extensive canvassing, no one had seen anything unusual on the night she disappeared. Her cell phone had been found discarded in a storm drain about half a mile from her apartment, but it had been wiped clean of fingerprints and contained no useful evidence. For 3 weeks, Detective James Morrison and his partner, Detective Lisa Park, had been grasping at straws, following leads that went nowhere and interviewing dozens of people who had nothing substantial to offer. But now, standing in that dank basement, looking at Rebecca's lifeless body, everything changed. Because this wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. This was calculated, methodical, and deeply personal. Rebecca had been kept alive for days, maybe even weeks. The basement had been converted into a makeshift prison, complete with restraints, a small cot, and evidence that someone had been bringing food and water regularly. But perhaps most chilling of all was what they found clutched in Rebecca's hand, a small brass key that didn't match any of the locks in the house. Detective Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the Portland Police Bureau, had seen his share of horrific crime scenes, but something about this case felt different from the moment he stepped into that basement. Maybe it was the methodical nature of the setup, or maybe it was the fact that Rebecca had clearly been kept alive for an extended period. Whatever it was, he knew they were dealing with someone who had planned this meticulously, and might very well strike again. The autopsy revealed that Rebecca had died from blunt force trauma to the head, but the medical examiner estimated that she had been held captive for at least 2 weeks before her death. There were signs of prolonged psychological torture, evidence that her captor had been playing mind games with her, alternating between periods of apparent kindness and cruel psychological manipulation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the medical examiner, no relation to Rebecca's roommate, noted that Rebecca's fingernails contained traces of concrete dust and her knuckles were raw, suggesting she had spent considerable time trying to claw her way out of her prison. But the real breakthrough came when crime scene investigators discovered something that would change the entire trajectory of the case. Hidden behind a loose brick in the basement wall was a small cavity containing Rebecca's diary, a leather-bound journal that she had apparently managed to keep with her throughout her captivity. What they found inside those pages would not only reveal the identity of her killer, but also expose a web of deception and manipulation that reached far deeper into the community than anyone could have imagined. The diary entries began normally enough. Rebecca wrote about her daily life, her studies, her hopes for the future. But as investigators read further, they began to notice a pattern. Rebecca had been writing about feeling watched, about the sense that someone was following her. At first she dismissed these feelings as paranoia brought on by stress from her studies. But as the entries progressed, it became clear that her instincts had been absolutely correct. September 10th entry. I saw him again today. The man with the red baseball cap. He was sitting on the bench outside the library when I went in, and he was still there when I came out 3 hours later. Same position, same newspaper, but I could tell he wasn't actually reading it. When I started walking toward him to see if I recognized him, he got up and left. Maybe I'm going crazy, but I swear he's been around a lot lately. September 15th entry. Sarah thinks I'm being paranoid, but I know someone has been in our apartment. Little things are moved. My coffee mug was in a different spot on the counter. My textbooks were rearranged on my desk. I asked Sarah if she had been in my room, and she said no. I'm starting to keep track of exactly where I leave things so I can tell if they've been moved. September 20th entry. I found a note in my backpack today. Just a single piece of paper with my name written on it in block letters. Nothing else. Sarah didn't put it there, and I know I didn't write it. I'm scared, but I don't know what to tell the police. What am I supposed to say? Someone wrote my name on a piece of paper. The entries painted a picture of a young woman who was increasingly aware that she was being stalked, but felt helpless to do anything about it. She had tried to vary her routine, had considered going to the police, had even asked friends to walk with her sometimes. But her stalker was patient, careful, and always seemed to be one step ahead of her. But it was the final entries, written during her captivity, that truly shocked the investigators, because Rebecca had continued writing throughout her imprisonment, documenting not just her physical condition, but also her conversations with her captor, and what she revealed in those pages would turn the entire investigation upside down. October 1st entry. It's been a week since he took me. I know exactly who he is now, and that's the most terrifying part. I trusted him. I let him get close to me because I thought he was safe, because I thought he was trying to help me. God, how could I have been so stupid? The diary revealed that Rebecca's captor was Dr. Michael Henley, a 45-year-old psychology professor at Portland State University, Rebecca's own professor. Dr. Henley had been teaching at the university for over a decade, and was well respected in his field. He was married with 2 teenage children, active in his church, and coached Little League baseball on weekends. He was by all outward appearances a pillar of the community. But according to Rebecca's diary, Dr. Henley had been slowly grooming her for months. It had started innocently enough: extra attention in class, offers to help with her research, invitations to academic conferences. Rebecca had been flattered by the attention from such a respected professor, and had seen it as validation of her academic potential. She had even mentioned Dr. Henley to her family as an inspiring mentor who was helping guide her career. October 3rd entry. He keeps talking about how special I am, how I understand psychology in a way that most students don't. He says he's been watching me, studying my behavior, and that I have a natural intuition for human nature. But then he says things that make my skin crawl. He talks about how most people are sheep, how they go through life without ever truly understanding themselves or others. He says he's going to teach me things about the human mind that they don't teach in textbooks. The diary entries revealed that Dr. Henley had been using his knowledge of psychology to manipulate and torment Rebecca throughout her captivity. He would alternate between periods of seeming kindness, bringing her books to read, engaging her in intellectual discussions about psychology, and periods of cruel psychological torture designed to break down her sense of self and reality. October 8th entry. Today he brought me a mirror, and made me look at myself while he talked about how isolation affects the human psyche. He said he's conducting an experiment, using me as a subject to study the effects of captivity on cognitive function. He takes notes about everything, how I react to different stimuli, how my behavior changes over time, how my perception of reality shifts. He's treating me like a lab rat, and the worst part is that he genuinely seems to believe this is legitimate research. But perhaps the most chilling revelation in the diary was that Dr. Henley had done this before. Rebecca had managed to get him talking during one of his more talkative moods, and he had mentioned other subjects in his research. He spoke about them clinically, referring to them by number rather than name, discussing their responses to various psychological pressures as if they were case studies rather than human beings. October 12th entry. He told me about Subject 7 today, a girl who didn't adapt well to the research environment. He said she became too aggressive, too unpredictable, and that he had to terminate the study early. I think he killed her. I think he's killed others. And I think I'm going to be next if I don't find a way out of here. The final entries in the diary were increasingly desperate as Rebecca realized that her time was running out. She had been looking for ways to escape, testing the strength of her restraints, trying to find weaknesses in the basement's construction. She had even managed to work one brick loose from the wall, and had hidden her diary in the cavity behind it, hoping that if something happened to her, someone would eventually find it and know the truth about what had happened. October 14th entry. I can tell he's getting bored with me. He's spending less time down here, and when he does come he seems distracted, disinterested. He's starting to talk about concluding the study and moving on to new research opportunities. I think he's already picked out his next victim. God help whoever it is. The diary's final entry was written in increasingly shaky handwriting, suggesting that Rebecca was becoming weaker or more frightened as time went on. October 15th entry. I hear him upstairs, moving around more than usual. Something has changed. He seems agitated, nervous. I think something has gone wrong with his plan, or maybe someone is getting suspicious. Either way, I don't think I have much time left. If someone finds this diary, please know that Dr. Michael Henley, psychology professor at Portland State University, did this to me, and please find his other victims. Please don't let me be forgotten. Armed with this evidence, Detectives Morrison and Park immediately obtained a warrant for Dr. Henley's arrest, but when they arrived at his house, they found it empty. His wife Margaret told them that Michael had left 3 days early, saying he had to attend a conference in Seattle. But when they checked with the conference organizers, they found that Dr. Henley had never registered to attend. The investigation into Dr. Henley's background revealed a pattern of suspicious behavior going back years. While he had never been formally accused of any crimes, there had been complaints from students about inappropriate attention, instances of him showing up unexpectedly at off-campus events, and reports of him asking overly personal questions during office hours. The university administration had received several informal complaints over the years, but nothing had ever been substantiated enough to warrant formal action. More disturbing still was what they found when they searched Dr. Henley's office and home. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet in his home office were detailed files on dozens of female students, containing photographs, personal information, class schedules, and psychological profiles. The files were meticulously organized and showed evidence of extensive surveillance. Some of the files went back over 5 years, and several were marked with codes that investigators believed corresponded to different phases of his stalking behavior. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found Dr. Henley's own journal, hidden in a safety deposit box that his wife didn't even know he had. The journal revealed the mind of a predator who had been using his position of authority and his knowledge of psychology to systematically hunt and torture young women for years. He wrote about his victims with clinical detachment, referring to them as research subjects and documenting their responses to various forms of psychological manipulation, as if he were conducting legitimate scientific research. The journal entries revealed that Rebecca was not his first victim. Over the past 7 years, Dr. Henley had abducted and murdered at least 6 other young women, all students or recent graduates in their early 20s. He had perfected his method over time, learning how to select victims who were less likely to be immediately missed,
how to establish trust before making his move, and how to dispose of evidence in ways that made the disappearances look random or accidental. Each victim had been held for weeks or months while Dr. Henley conducted what he termed psychological research, elaborate torture scenarios designed to test their responses to fear, isolation, and hopelessness. He documented everything meticulously, treating their suffering as data points in some twisted scientific study, and when he grew bored with each victim, or felt that his research was complete, he killed them and disposed of their bodies in remote locations throughout Oregon and Washington. The manhunt for Dr. Henley became one of the largest in Oregon's history. His photograph was distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country, and the FBI joined the investigation given the multi-state nature of his crimes. But Dr. Henley seemed to have vanished completely. His credit cards hadn't been used, his cell phone was turned off, and there were no hits on his license plate or any other identifying information. For 3 weeks, investigators followed every lead, checked every possible hiding place, and interviewed anyone who might have information about his whereabouts. They discovered that Dr. Henley had been planning his escape for months, gradually liquidating assets and creating false identities. He had withdrawn large amounts of cash from various accounts over the previous year, and investigators found evidence that he had been researching how to live off the grid. But it was Rebecca's diary that ultimately led to Dr. Henley's capture. In one of her entries, she had mentioned overhearing him talking on the phone about a cabin in the mountains where he could continue his research without interruption. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but investigators realized this might be where he was hiding. After checking property records for anyone with connections to Dr. Henley, they discovered that his deceased father had owned a remote cabin in the Cascade Mountains, about 2 hours east of Portland. The property had been inherited by Dr. Henley's brother, who lived in California and rarely visited Oregon. When investigators contacted the brother, they learned that Michael had asked for the keys to the cabin several months earlier, claiming he needed a quiet place to work on a research project. On November 8, 2019, nearly a month after Rebecca's body was discovered, a team of FBI agents and local law enforcement surrounded the cabin. They found Dr. Henley inside, along with evidence that he had been preparing to abduct another victim. The cabin had been set up as another makeshift prison, complete with restraints, surveillance equipment, and detailed plans for what he called Phase 2 of his research. Dr. Henley was arrested without incident, though investigators noted that he seemed almost relieved to be caught. During his initial interrogation, he spoke about his crimes with the same clinical detachment that had characterized his journal entries, referring to his victims as subjects and his torture methods as research techniques. He showed no remorse for the pain he had caused, and seemed genuinely puzzled that others couldn't see the scientific value of his work. The trial of Dr. Michael Henley began in the spring of 2020 and became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Oregon's history. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, presented a mountain of evidence including Rebecca's diary, Dr. Henley's own journal, the detailed files on his victims, and testimony from law enforcement officers and forensic experts. The defense team, faced with overwhelming evidence of their client's guilt, attempted to argue that Dr. Henley was mentally ill, and therefore not responsible for his actions. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified about various personality disorders and the effects of childhood trauma, but the prosecution countered with evidence of Dr. Henley's meticulous planning, his ability to maintain a normal facade for years while committing his crimes, and his clear understanding of right and wrong as evidenced by his efforts to avoid detection. Perhaps the most powerful moment in the trial came when the prosecution read excerpts from Rebecca's diary aloud in court. The courtroom was silent, as the prosecutor's voice conveyed Rebecca's growing fear, her realization of who her captor really was, and her desperate final entries as she faced the reality of her situation. Several jurors were visibly emotional, and even the judge had to take a brief recess to compose himself. The families of Dr. Henley's other victims also testified, sharing their stories of loss and the years of uncertainty they had endured not knowing what had happened to their daughters. Through their testimony, the court learned about Sarah Mitchell, a 22-year-old art student, who had disappeared 3 years earlier, Jennifer Walsh, a 24-year-old graduate student in social work, Amanda Rodriguez, a 21-year-old psychology major, Lisa Thompson, a 23-year-old education student, and Karen Williams, a 20-year-old pre-med student. Each had been young, intelligent, and ambitious. Each had trusted their professor and mentor, and each had paid the ultimate price for that trust. The trial lasted 6 weeks, and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts, including 6 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of kidnapping, and various other charges related to his crimes. The judge sentenced Dr. Henley to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, calling his crimes among the most heinous and calculated acts of evil he had seen in his decades on the bench. But the story didn't end with Dr. Henley's conviction. The revelations about his crimes led to significant changes in how universities handle reports of inappropriate behavior by faculty members. Portland State University implemented new policies requiring mandatory reporting of any concerns about faculty-student relationships, increased training for recognizing signs of predatory behavior, and established better support systems for students who report concerns. Rebecca's family established a foundation in her memory dedicated to supporting victims of stalking and abduction. They worked with law enforcement agencies to improve training for recognizing and investigating cases of systematic stalking, and they lobbied for legislative changes to make it easier for victims to get protection from their stalkers before violence occurs. The investigation also led to the discovery of additional evidence linking Dr. Henley to several other missing persons cases across the Pacific Northwest. While he was never formally charged with these additional crimes due to insufficient evidence, investigators believe his actual victim count may be significantly higher than the 6 murders for which he was convicted. Rebecca Martinez's diary, the small leather-bound journal that she managed to hide in her final days, became more than just evidence in a criminal case. It became a testament to her courage, her intelligence, and her determination to ensure that the truth about her death would eventually come to light. Even in her darkest moments, facing unimaginable terror, and knowing that her time was running out, Rebecca found the strength to document what was happening to her and to think about the other victims who might come after her. Today, Dr. Michael Henley remains in Oregon State Penitentiary, where he spends his days in solitary confinement for his own protection. He has never shown any remorse for his crimes, and continues to maintain that his actions were justified in the name of scientific research. Prison officials report that he spends most of his time writing, though the content of his writing is carefully monitored and restricted. The case of Rebecca Martinez and the monster who called himself her mentor serves as a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most respectable facades. Dr. Henley was a trusted educator, a family man, a pillar of his community, but behind that carefully constructed image was a predator who used his position of authority and his understanding of human psychology to prey upon the very students he was supposed to protect and nurture. Rebecca's story also reminds us of the importance of trusting our instincts. Throughout her diary entries, it's clear that Rebecca sensed something was wrong long before she was actually abducted. She felt watched. She noticed things being moved in her apartment. She recognized that someone was paying too much attention to her. But like many young women, she second-guessed herself, worried that she was being paranoid, and hesitated to report her concerns because she didn't have concrete proof. The investigation into Dr. Henley's crimes continues to this day, as law enforcement agencies across the country review cold cases involving missing young women to see if there might be connections to his activities. While he has been sentenced for 6 murders, investigators believe there may be other victims whose bodies have never been found, and whose families are still searching for answers. In the end, Rebecca Martinez's diary didn't just solve her own murder, it potentially saved the lives of future victims by stopping a serial killer who showed no signs of slowing down. Her words, written in desperation and fear but also with remarkable clarity and courage, became the key that unlocked one of the most disturbing criminal cases in Oregon's history. And while her life was cut tragically short, her legacy lives on in the changes that have been made to protect other young women from predators who might try to exploit positions of trust and authority. Rebecca Martinez was just 23 years old when she died, but her diary ensured that her voice would continue to be heard long after her death. In those final desperate days of her life, she found a way to speak for herself and for all the other victims who could no longer speak, and in doing so she made sure that the man who destroyed so many lives would never have the chance to destroy another.